Welcome back to our lecture in our subject Theories of Crime Causation. So our lecture today is on the nature theory. And at the end of this lesson, the learners or the viewers are expected to rephrase the concept of nature theory and to rate or evaluate the concept of nature theory. So again, your presenter is Darlito Bernard Delizo, known as Tatay D, Sir D, and Dr. D. So if you have not subscribed yet my channel, you are requested and invited to subscribe my channel. So what are the nature theories? Well, the nature theories, according to Coyne and Wrights in 2014, they said that these are the theories that assert that the etiology of criminal behavior is biologically based in genetic inheritance and the structure and functions of people's brains and other psychological responses. So, our behavior per se, according to the nature theories, is same with the genetic or same with the genetical theories. So in other words, nature theories are still part of your biological theories of crime causation. However, in the subject matter, we'll be dealing more or we'll be focusing on the areas of intelligence or the intelligence quotient in relation to criminality or criminal behavior. So there is a debate on whether our behavior is a product of nature or a product of nurturing. So you have that the nature theory versus the nurture theory. In the same manner, even our criminal behavior is still debatable whether it is a product of inheritance or a product of environmental factors. So in the nature theory, they believe that intelligence is largely determined genetically and that low intelligence is linked to criminal behavior. So they are saying, those proponents of nature theories, that yung talino natin, yung galing natin ay practically ito ay mga na-inherit natin or minana natin. At yung tao na mababa ang IQ level or mababa ang kanyang comprehension ay mataas yung tendency to commit criminality. On the other hand, though, the proponents of nurture theory practically are focusing or um, relating criminality with other environmental factors. So when you say environmental factors, it could be the physical or the social and other cultural factors. Okay, so the nurture theory believes that intelligence is not inherited but largely a product of environment, a product of upbringing, a product of socialization, and a product of educational learnings. And according to the proponents of nurture theory, low IQ scores do not cause crime but may result from the same environmental factors. So they are focusing on environmental factors as the primary determinants of criminal behavior. However, in the nature theory, they believe that low intelligence is greatly an influencing factor to criminal behavior, and they say that intelligence is a product of your genes or it is inherited. Okay? Now, how do they measure the mental capability of a person? Well, you have the psychometry. By the way, psychometry before was a pseudoscience because psychometry was like a kind of parapsychology, meaning this a kind of practice before that when a person touches an object, he will have that spiritual discernment about the history of that object. So parang ganito yon. Kapag ang isang tao noon ay kanyang hinawakan ang isang bato, ay malalaman niya yung historical background ng bato na yan. And that is a parapsychology. Pag sinabi nating parapsychology, it is just like understanding the background of something based on when you touch it. So para siyang spiritual, kumbaga. However, today, when we speak of psychometry, particularly psychometric, we're referring now to the field that seeks to measure the intelligence of a person. So in the area of criminology, according to Frank Hagan, he said that psychometry is the field that seeks to measure psychological and mental differences between criminals and non-criminals. Ito yung pagdidetermine ng IQ level, ng mental capability ng isang tao or abilities ng isang tao, okay, by examining it through the process of what you call psychometry. And insofar as the IQ test is concerned, so for example, sir, bakit kailangan ng IQ? Bakit yung NAPOLCOM exam ay IQ? Bakit karamihan ng mga examinations ay IQ? Ang tinetest niya, hindi yung EQ. No? So, well, the idea here is that in psychometric tests, it includes now the measurement of the range of skills from cognitive abilities and your knowledges to assess one's personality, and the tests are an objective way to measure the potential ability of candidates to perform well in a job role. That's according to Assessment Day, okay, in the internet. Okay, so you can read that in their website, the Assessment Day, na sinasabi doon na kapag nagpa-IQ test ka, yan ay dinidetermine whether isang tao ay magiging good employee or not. So, ganun yan. Kahit saan kayo mag-exam, kahit sa NAPOLCOM or sa mga qualifying exams sa Armed Forces of the Philippines, sa Tri-Bureau, and any other bureaus in the country or in the government, practically, ang mga exam niyan ay testing your IQ level. You call that the psychometric test. Kasi kapag mataas ang IQ level mo, mas mataas yung comprehension, mas mataas yung intellectual capacity mo, and then mas mataas yung initiative mo sa pagtatrabaho. Yun ang kanilang idea dyan. Okay, however, psychometry insofar as used in criminology, ito naman yung ina-attempt para i-measure yung mental and cognitive abilities ng mga criminals and non-criminal. So that's why Hagan further said that the school of psychometry attempts to explain the correlation of intelligence and crime. So who are the proponents of the nature theory? Well, we go back to that, no? Remember the family studies of the Kalikak families, where Henry Goddard is was focused on the feeble-mindedness of the family. That's why they committed crime. Okay, so isa yan si Henry Goddard, actually, na proponent yan. Alam naman natin, si Henry Goddard is focusing much on the superiority of intelligence of an individual. Okay, if you remember our discussions dun sa Kalikak families. So Henry Goddard in his studies in 1920, that many institutionalized people were what he considered feeble-minded, meaning ito yung mga nakakulong, yung mga criminals. Okay, and concluded that at least half of all juvenile delinquents were mentally defective. Yun ang kanyang idea. Okay? So para sa kanya, kailangan para mawala ang criminality, tanggalin yung mga bobo. Okay, dapat yung mga matatalino lamang ang mag-asawa. Kaya pag medyo mababang IQ, mag-asawa ka sa mataas ang IQ para yung mga offsprings ay more or less matatalino yan. So yun ang idea ni Henry Goddard insofar as crime prevention is concerned, because ang sabi niya, ang root ng criminality is yung mababa ang comprehension or low IQ yung tao. Okay? On the other hand, William Haley and Augusta Bronner tested a group of delinquents in Chicago and Boston, and they found that 37% were subnormal in intelligence. And they concluded that delinquent boys were 5 to 10 times more likely to be mentally deficient than delinquent boys. Thus, many criminologists agreed with the predisposition of substandard individuals toward delinquency. So, tinasabi ng mga ito at mga ibang mga proponent ng intelligence and crime or nature theories that talagang yung mga medyo mahina ang kanilang IQ level ay sila yung mga mataas ang tendency na mag-commit ng crimes. And while it is acknowledged that a range of personal and environmental factors are likely to influence offending behavior, okay, so ibig sabihin yan, maraming mga factors, just like gender, whether you're a male or a female or you're a member of the LGBTQ community, your age, about your friends, about your economy and everything, these are all, we call it influential to criminality. However, those proponents of the nature theory are linking or they are not discounting the link between low levels of IQ and criminal involvement. Okay? In other words, kahit sinasabi nila, na-accept nila na maraming factors na nag-influence. Pero sabi nila, maliki pa rin yung factor na uh, kino-contribute ng low IQ upang yung mga tao ay nakapag-commit ng criminality. So further, there was a meta-analysis of research. So when you say meta-analysis, ito yung lahat ng mga researches on IQ and crime. So maraming researches sa iba't ibang mga states, iba't ibang countries. So kinulate ito, meaning ito ay pinagsama-sama at tinignan yung kanilang conclusion. And eventually, this meta-analysis of those researches, they found out the influence of cognitive and affective empathy to offending offender, found that the relationship between low empathy and offending disappeared after controlling for intelligence and socioeconomic status. Anong ibig sabihin nun? Okay? So, minsan ang tao nakapag-commit ng crime because of empathy. You know what does empathy means? No? Yung empathy, yung you are placing yourself in one's shoes, parang ganon. So, sinasabi nila, sa mga researches na yan ay yung empathy lumalabas na malaking factor ito na nagko-contribute sa criminality. However, nung dinagdag na nila yung variables about intelligence and the socio-economic status, ay hindi na nag-appear yung empathy as a factor resulting to criminal behavior. Okay, that is not to disregard the concept of empathy, but rather to emphasize the ability to understand another person's emotions may be a primary function of intelligence. In other words, okay, kapag mataas ang iyong talino, mataas ang iyong intelligence level, okay, mas naintindihan mo ngayon yung emotions ng ibang tao that may cause you basically to commit or not to commit a crimes according to Joliffe and Farrington. So further research researches were conducted, and a research uh, that has aimed to examine the origins of offending behavior, particularly juvenile delinquency, continues to identify low IQ as a predictor of criminal behavior according to Diaz et al. Again, Dr. Henry Goddard, after his long study of feeble-mindedness, he concluded now that every mentally deficient individual is a potential criminal. Kaya sabi niya, kapag yan ay mga low IQ, huwag mo silang dalhin sa mga tawag natin sa mga lugar kung saan mataas ang tendency na mag-commit ng crime because sila ay mga potential criminals yan. So delikado. And according to him, 40% of families manifesting feeble-mindedness show criminality, and that sex delinquency in such families is practically the rule. So yun ang sinasabi niya kasi sa kanya nga, pag feeble-minded ka, kapag bobo ka, hindi mo nare-realize yung consequence, whether nakakahiya o hindi yung ginagawa mo. So, kaya si Dr. Henry Goddard, medyo bias siya against the feeble-minded people. And additionally, it has been proposed that lower IQ, especially the poor verbal ability, restricts the probability of academic success at school. Ito yung mga taong nahihiya na mag-recite, nahihiya na makipag-participate. Okay, so basically yung mga tao ito, tendency nun, they have the greater possibility of failing in their academic endeavors. And that failure in the academic achievement will increase now their likelihood of delinquent acts. Kasi nga, hindi nga sila nakaka-cope up sa school, so ang tendency nun ay they would rather do some delinquent acts. Again, that is according to Diaz et al. And a body of research has also demonstrated that individuals with lower IQ levels are more likely to commit more severe and violent offenses. And evidence exists which demonstrates that criminal offenders have lower IQs than non-offenders according to the researches conducted by Fieldman, Herrnstein, and Morey, and Wilson and Harnstein. So yun ang nakita nila, mayroong talagang bearing daw yung tawag natin yung IQ level ng tao sa kanyang disposition to commit a crime. Now, on the book of James Q. Wilson and Richard Hurston, The Crime and Human Nature, they concluded that the IQ, okay, crime link is indirect. Meaning, hindi wala namang direkta, sabi nila, na kapag bobo ka, ay criminal ka na. Pero, merong indirect na correlationship na sinasabi that low intelligence leads to poor school performance. So, dahil bobo ka, okay, mahina ka sa klase, so ang tendency nun ay it will lead you further to criminal behavior or delinquent behavior. So, sabi nila, hindi naman direkta, sabi. So, mayroong influence pero hindi siya direct na pag sinabi kasing direct correlation ay sinasabi niyan kapag bobo ka, criminal ka. Okay? Pag matalino ka, hindi ka maging criminal. Yun ang direct. Ito naman sabi nila, indirect. No? Dahil ang pagiging feeble-minded, sabi nila, ay magkokos ng failure mo sa ibang endeavors and because you are failure to those kinds of endeavors, particularly school performance, then eventually you might be led to commit delinquent acts or criminal behavior. On the other hand, Travis Hershey and Michael Hendelang, they published in 1997 an article linking intelligence and crime, and they proposed the idea that low IQ increases the likelihood of criminal behavior through its effect on school performance. So it's almost similar with Wilson. Okay, that youths with low IQs do poorly in school, and school failure and academic incompetence are highly related to delinquency and later to adult criminality. Yun ulit, no? So, mayroong link. Dahil mahina ka sa klase, karon ng mahinang school performance, so eventually, that person will be led to delinquent acts and later on, pag nag-adult na siya, it will develop into criminal behavior. On the other hand, the bell curve controversial book of Harnstein with Charles Murray, they confirm that adolescents with low IQs are more likely to commit crime and they get caught and be sent to prison. So sinasabi nila na yung mga feeble-minded, yung mga bobo, yung mga mahinang IQ, sila yung mataas ang tendency na mag-commit crime at sila rin yung madaling nahuhuli. Kasi hindi nila napaplano yung pag-commit ng crime. In other words, sinasabi nila na yung mga medyo mataas ang IQ level, nagko-commit din ng crime, sabi nila, pero hindi sila masyadong nahuhuli dahil planado yung kanilang ginagawa. So conversely, at-risk kids with higher IQ seems to be protected from becoming criminals by their superior ability to succeed in school and in social relationship. Kasi nga, mataas ang IQ level nila, so they tend to be successful, so there is no reason for them na mag-commit ng delinquency. Okay? Now, a large body of early researches found clear links between lower intelligence and criminal behavior, as we mentioned on the work of Hershey in Hendelang and we call it Wilson and Hershey and Murray. There is also research that provided preliminary evidence that individuals who are incarcerated are also more likely to suffer from alexithymia, otherwise known as a diminished ability to identify and or communicate feelings. Ano yon? Ito yung tao na hindi mo maintindihan yung pakiramdam mo. Hindi mo ma-explain yung pakiramdam mo. That's the idea. You do not understand your feelings. That is alexithymia na tinatawag natin. Ano yung nararamdaman mo kaya hindi mo naintindihan. So because of that confusion, because of that we call it inability to understand yourself, inability to understand your emotions, tendency nun ay maaring makapag-commit ka ng crime. Or yung mga tinatawag natin na kapag commit ng crime, hindi nila nare-realize, hindi nila naiisip or maintindihan bakit nila nagawa yun or bakit nila ginagawa or bakit sila nagkakaroon ng feeling na maging kriminal, you call that alexithymia or the diminished ability to identify or communicate feelings. In an effort to elucidate the complex relationship between IQ and criminal activity, researchers have also attempted to categorize offenders into subgroups. And two large-scale studies provided indication that the offense of murder is disproportionately overrepresented among inmates with an intellectual disability. So according to Hayes and McRain, as well as Jones and Combs, ang kanilang findings is that sa mga violent criminals or yung mga nag-commit ng murder ay mas marami kaysa ibang mga uri ng criminality. Okay? That is sa mga nakukumit na mga tao with intellectual disability. And those researchers that we have mentioned have also suggested that those with an intellectual disability are more likely to commit other types of offenses, including against property and persons such as assault, arson, and theft-related offenses. So, hindi lang murder, kundi halos lahat na ng uri ng criminality. And in contrast, those people with higher level of, we call it IQs, no? Or the offenses that require a higher level of sophistication, just like drug pushing, false pretenses, are less likely to be committed. In other words, kapag yung crime ay white collar or yung crime ay medyo maraming intricacies, yung mga tao na mababa ang IQ level, they do not tend to do that kasi hindi sila marunong na tawag natin gumawa ng mga storylines nila. Hindi sila marunong na gumawa ng kanilang mga pretenses o yung mga pagkukunwari para hindi sila mahuli. So practically, ang mga crimes daw na mga ito, yung mga crimes na hindi na masyadong ginagamitan ng pagpaplano or pag-iisip. And today we have modern advocates of IQ and criminality. Okay, do not insist that intelligence potential is entirely inherited, viewing it as an acquired and inherited entity. So in other words, hanggang ngayon, marami pa rin ang advocates ng IQ and criminality. Only that, ang tingin nila sa IQ level is not purely in nature, but rather partly a nature and partly nurture. So sinasabi nila na yes, ang IQ level ay nakakapag-contribute sa criminality because a person or individual may fail to realize the consequences of his or her acts. However, sabi nila, ang low intelligence is hindi naman lahat yan ay hereditary but rather pwedeng manurture din yan. Okay? Well, maaring totoo nga kasi may kilala naman akong ganyan na hindi naman siya ganon katalinuhan sa school and yet dahil masigasig siya, eventually naging successful naman yan. Okay? So maaring totoo nga. And IQ remains a critical variable in explaining traditional crimes. So sinasabi ng mga modern advocates ng IQ and criminality is isa pa rin critical na factor itong IQ level ng tao to explain yung mga traditional crimes, meaning yung mga pag-commit na mga crimes against property, crimes against person, and delinquency. And it may also help in explaining white-collar crimes committed most likely by people with higher IQ. Kaya maraming matatalino ang kanilang mga crime ay more or less sophisticated. Kaya yung mga, tignan nyo yung investigation ng money laundering, ay maraming layer yon. Yung tawag natin, yung pag-trace nila, pag-track nila ng pera, kasi hindi kayang gawin yon ng mga mababang IQ. Mga mababang IQ, accordingly, nagko-commit yan ng crime, na mga simple crime lang yan, hindi na masyadong kailangan ng mga complexities of planning and hiding it. On the other hand, the people who have a higher IQ level, they are also engaged in criminality, pero ang kanilang criminality ay more or less sophisticated yung kanilang pag-commit na hindi masyadong naintindihan, hindi masyadong kinukumit ng mga tao na mas mababang IQ level because hindi nila masyadong maintindihan yung process. That's according to Hagan in his book in 2002, Introduction to Criminology. So, thus only low intelligence can be passed by the mother to her siblings. What the mother can pass to her siblings is the intelligence, whether high or low. That's according to the study, which I have already mentioned in my earlier videos. And what is the difference between crime and delinquency? Crime is an act that violates the law, and it's usually committed by adults, while delinquency is the illegal participation by a minor of an offense which falls under the statutory age limit. Example, cutting classes, cheating in class, and of course, other kinds of minor cases. No? So yun lang ang pagkakaiba niyan, yung mga delinquency. And that delinquency may develop later on into a criminal behavior. Why is nature theory important in criminology? Well, it is important in criminology because it discusses the biological genetic predispositions impact on human traits. Meaning, hindi pa rin humihiwalay ang tao sa pag-intindi na ang ating behavior ay partly inherited and partly nurtured. At importante yan to understand. In fact, ganun din sa when you deal with people, say for example, mayroon kayong katulong sa bahay, domestic helper kayo. Medyo may kaya ang inyong buhay, then mayroon kayong mga domestic helper. So minsan yung mga amo nila, pinapagalitan nila yung kanilang mga domestic helpers kasi medyo mali-mali, sumasablay yung trabaho nila. Well, you have to understand this. You do not treat the domestic helpers or yung mga katulong sa bahay in that way kapag sumasablay sila. Kasi kapag mas matalino mga yan at nakapag-aral mga yan, wala sila sa inyo, di sila katulong. In other words, ganun lang talaga yung level ng kanilang mentality or ng kanilang comprehension. So ganun din, marami akong mga naging staff na natawag natin sa bahay or whatever, no? Mga trabahador. So makikita mo maraming sablay din sa trabaho nila. Then intindihin mo na lang na ganun talaga yung level nila. So yun ang idea niyan. So the same thing sa criminology, intindihin mo na yung mga taong yan ay malakas yung tendency na mag-commit ng crime. Therefore, ang policy implication niyan ay dapat ma-educate yung mga tao. Dapat tinatawag natin how to improve yung kanilang IQ level or yung kanilang ma-improve yung kanilang social life so that hindi sila mag-commit ng criminality or delinquent acts. And finally, what does the Bible say about feeble-mindedness and about intelligence? In Proverbs 18:15, it says in there that an intelligent heart acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. In other words, ang tao na matalino ay gusto niya na magkaroon siya ng kaalaman at magkaroon siya ng karunungan. Magkaiba kasi yung kaalaman at karunungan. Maaring marami kang alam pero hindi ka marunong. When you say marunong, you are wise. Maaring kukunting alam mo, but if you are wise, you are using what you know in the right way. Yun ang ibig sabihin ng wisdom. And in Proverbs 14, chapter 14, verse 16, one who is wise is cautious and turns away from evil, but a fool is reckless and careless. So, iba ng Bible, sinasabi niya, kapag yung tao na matalino, yung tao na marunong ay very cautious yan sa kanyang ginagawa at alam niya kung mali o tamang kanyang ginagawa, so he turns away from evil. Pero yung tao na foolish, yung tao na feeble-minded, ay hindi niya naisip yung consequences, whether evil or good yung kanyang gagawin. That's why he is reckless and careless. So, eventually, may tendency na mag-commit ng sin or mag-commit ng crime. Okay? So, that's all for this lecture. Once again, thank you for watching and listening. And if you have some comments, you are free to write it on the comments section. If you have any questions also, you may write it in the comments section. So again, if you have not subscribed to my channel, you are requested and you are asked to subscribe my channel. So again, God bless you all. Good day, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you are watching my video. So may the Lord bless you. Okay, so thank you.